Hello everyone, this is Aries Trivia, and today we're continuing the 12 Tiger Generals of Wu Let's Talk Lore series with episode 8 featuring Ling Tong. Now, to properly introduce Ling Tong, we have to first look at his father Ling Tong, who first joined under Sun Ce's service around 195 when Sun Ce left Yuanshu to start his conquest in the south. As a recruit from the Wu commandery, Ling Tong distinguished himself on the battlefield as member of the 1st to Scale Battalion, or the unit that was tasked with leading any assault. His bravery and skills in battle would eventually earn him the position as the mayor of the Yongping County, where he would be tasked with suppressing local Shangyue threats. This would eventually promote him to the captain title of Po Zei Xiao Wei, or the captain who breaks the enemy. Unfortunately, Ling Tao's bravery and position as one of the 1st to Scale Battalion would eventually cost him his life, as in 203, during Sun Quan's first assault on Huangzu, Ling Tong ended up leading the pursuit of Huangzu's defeated navy. But during this pursuit, Huangzu's rearguard, led by Gan Ning, unleashed volley upon volleys of arrows to slow down the pursuit. Gan Ning in particular was very skilled with the bow, as he would end up identifying Ling Tong as the commander of the battalion before taking his life with a skillfully aimed shot. With Ling Tao's death in 203, he would leave behind a young son in Ling Tong, who was only 15 at the time, as he was born in 189. Now, despite his young age, Ling Tong was still promoted by Sun Quan to the position of Biebu Sima and given a low-tier captain title of Po Zei Du Wei, or the captain who breaks the enemy, in a direct nod to his late father's title. Now, just to be clear, even though both titles here have the Po Zei adjective, which means who breaks the enemy, the Du Wei position is a lower tier title compared to the Xiao Wei. So while they're both captains, the version that Ling Tong got was the lower tier one versus the one his father had. Additionally, Ling Tao's original 300 retinue was also passed over to Ling Tong, as he would essentially continue his father's position in the army. And the first battle that Ling Tong would participate in would be the attack on a fortified Shangyue position in Ma Dun. At this time, the Wu forces had amassed an army of 10,000 troops for the siege, with Lieutenant Zhang Yi in command. On the eve of the assault, the army held a feast to rally the troop morale, but during this feast, Zhang Yi had a few too many cups to drink and started to bully and abuse some of the other captains at the feast. Standing up for himself and his fellow captains, Ling Tong confronted Zhang Yi, who responded by belittling not only Ling Tong, but also his late father Ling Tong. Unable to fight back against his superior, the youngster Ling Tong sat back down in tears as the feast ended prematurely after this incident. But with Zhang Yi still drunk and unhappy about being confronted by his subordinate, he continued to verbally abuse Ling Tong and slander Ling Tong as everyone filed out of the feast, until finally Ling Tong had enough as he drew his blade and stabbed Zhang Yi in front of the entire officer court. Now, Zhang Yi didn't die right away, but his wound would eventually claim him a few days later. And in the meantime, because the assault was planned for the very next morning, no one arrested Ling Tong, as Ling Tong volunteered for the 1st to Scale duties as he was prepared to give his life on the battlefield to repay for his actions. However, not only did Ling Tong not die on the battlefield, the assault battalion he led scaled the city walls first and broke through the enemy defenses to open a path for the rest of the army to eventually breach and take the city. And after the battle ended, Ling Tong turned himself in for punishment, as despite his accomplishments on the battlefield, he still struck and killed his commander. Fortunately for him, after Sun Quan heard about the incident and reviewed Ling Tong's actions during the assault, Sun Quan pardoned Ling Tong, as he believed that Ling Tong's deeds on the battlefield more than enough canceled out his crime. By 208, during Sun Quan's final campaign against Huangzu, Ling Tong was served in Sun Quan's vanguard once again, as he took up scouting duties in a light ship with just a dozen or so of his best troops. As they sailed far ahead of the main army, Ling Tong's scout ship made first contact with Huangzu's naval patrols. Catching sight of the enemy patrol ship, Ling Tong immediately ordered his men to ram their ships into the enemy, as they did not want the enemy to leave with intel of their approaching army. After ramming and boarding the enemy ship, Ling Tong and his men managed to kill the enemy officer Zhang Shuo, along with a few other troops before the rest of the ship surrendered. Ling Tong then brought the ship and prisoners back to Sun Quan, along with intel of the enemy deployment. Then during the main assault on Huangzu, two of Huangzu's flagship positioned themselves in the perfect spot to rain arrows on the path of Sun Quan's approach on land. And with no other way to bypass this threat of these two tower ships with thousands of archers aboard each ship, Zhou Yu ended up picking Dongxi and Ling Tong to lead 100 of their best troops in an attempt to cut the thick anchor ropes that held these two tower ships in place. Obviously, this was a near suicidal mission, but armed with double armor on all their troops, Dongxi and Ling Tong ended up completing and surviving this mission, as their success allowed Sun Quan to finish off Huangzu once and for all. Ling Tong even managed to sail back to the main force and join in on this final assault of Jiangxia, and for his efforts, Ling Tong was promoted to the position of Chenglie Du Wei, or the captain who inherited ferocity. Unfortunately, this promotion was basically a side grade, as he was still a Du Wei, or a low-tier captain. Ling Tong would finally be promoted to Xiao Wei, or a high-tier captain, after his participation at Chibi and the subsequent attack on Cao Ren at Nan in 209, as he would finally match his late father's rank. Now, I think one reason for Ling Tong's slow promotion despite his impressive achievements on the battlefield probably had to do with his age, as Ling Tong was just 20 years old during the Battle of Chibi, and even when he was promoted to Xiao Wei, he was just 21. In the next few years, Ling Tong's deployment would move around quite a bit, as his troubled relationship with Gan Ning forced Sun Quan to separate them, as Ling Tong actively tried to kill Gan Ning during a feast, where he offered to perform a sword dance with the intention to use the dance as a cover to strike at Gan Ning. And given Ling Tong's past history with Zhang Yi and his inability to forgive Gan Ning for his father Ling Cao's death, Sun Quan had little choice but to keep the two of them apart. Then finally in 215, Ling Tong and Gan Ning would end up serving together at the Assault of Wan in Lujiang under the command of Lu Meng. Following their victory, they both followed Lu Meng to the Jin province to attack Guan Yu. Here they were separated again, as Gan Ning was assigned to Lu Su to hold off Guan Yu in the north, while Ling Tong followed Lu Meng to take back the commanderies of Changsha, Guiyang, and Linling. This perhaps hinted that Ling Tong still had issues with serving alongside Gan Ning, but after Liu Bei and Sun Quan signed the Treaties of the Xiang River to redefine the borders of the Jin province, both Gan Ning and Ling Tong would once again follow Sun Quan together to launch the second siege of Hefei. At this point, Ling Tong was finally promoted to lieutenant, as he would get the title of lieutenant who sweeps the bandit, or 荡寇中郎将, and was also assigned to the position as the chancellor of the princedom of Pei. Now, this is an entirely symbolic promotion, as the princedom of Pei was not under the jurisdiction of Sun Quan, but in terms of prestige, it was on par with being a commandery administrator. With these promotions in place, Ling Tong will go on to have his career-defining moment at Hefei, as he and his retinue of 300 troops made the last stand during the final moments of the blotched retreat to buy time for Sun Quan's escape. In the end, every single man in Ling Tong's retinue died, as Ling Tong killed probably a dozen or so of Zhang Liao's troops before he plunged into the river to swim away to safety. When he dragged his injured self to Sun Quan's encampment, Sun Quan was amazed that Ling Tong was still alive, as everyone had thought he would have surely perished alongside his troops. Naturally, for Ling Tong's bravery and key role in saving Sun Quan's life, he was promoted to the position of lieutenant governor, or Pianjiangjun, and given the right to double his retinue size to 600, as in addition to his grave injuries, Ling Tong was overcome with grief, as the loss of his father's 300 retinue, many of which he had grown up with, hurt him much more than the cuts on his body. After this campaign, due to Ling Tong's injuries and his need to recruit fresh troops for his retinue, Sun Quan would assign Ling Tong to deal with the Shanyue threats on the home front, as Ling Tong believed that the Shanyue would make the best new recruits given their upbringing in the harsh conditions on the mountains. Thus in 217, Ling Tong led a series of campaigns against the Shanyue, where he not only conscripted the 600 troops needed for his own retinue, but over 10,000 troops in total for the Wu forces overall. Sadly, right after these recruitment campaigns had concluded, Ling Tong would fall ill and die at the age of just 29. Ling Tong would leave behind 2 young sons in Ling Lie and Ling Feng, who would both end up being raised by Sun Quan, who called them his tiger sons. When they reached the age of 8, Sun Quan had the scholar Ge Guang teach them classics, and when they reached 10, Sun Quan had them start learning how to ride as he prepared them to one day take over their father's retinue. In 229, when Sun Quan crowned himself as emperor, Ling Lie would go on to get the ceremonial title of Ting Hou, or low-tier marquis title, along with his father's retinue, but he would eventually go on to break the law and be stripped of his command. At that point, his younger brother Ling Feng eventually inherited the title and the retinue, but there are no records of him participating in any battle, as he probably remained a ceremonious commander within the Wu army, living off his father's feat of saving Sun Quan's life. And with that, our episode on Ling Tong comes to an end. Next time when we return, we'll move on to cover the life and career of our 10th Tiger General of Wu in Xu Sheng. So hopefully y'all have enjoyed this episode enough to consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Three Kingdoms history, or simply support the channel by leaving a comment below, or just by hitting the like button. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye!